All right. All right. Buenas and hafade todu samzu buena hudzung. This is a very special first episode in a series of episodes from Fanachu. I'm your host, Michael Lujan Bavacqua, but I'm going to be passing on this episode to two very special guests who are going to be introducing to us the upcoming series of Fanachu episodes that we are going to be talking about today. And that we're going to be talking about over the next few weeks. And so, one of the things that we've been talking about more and more on Fanachu and occupational hazard, I am the curator for the Guam Museum, so we have been talking more about museums. And so, one of the things that Indigenous people we struggle with more and more, of course, is the issue of reclaiming, repatriating, attempting to get back ancestors, artifacts, things that have been taken sometimes hundreds of years ago, sometimes just a few generations ago. We want to, when we find these things, we want to try to learn as much as we can about how they were taken from us, who is responsible for that, what can we learn from these collections, is it possible for us to bring them home? And so for the Chamorro people, this can often be a complicated thing because so many historians have told us over the years that we don't have much of a history, we don't have much of a culture. And so even when you look in a lot of the museums around the world, they might have amazing collections from other Pacific peoples, but they may not have as much from Chamorros. And so sometimes we might look at sort of the efforts for repatriation around the world, and we might think that Chamorros are not working to get things back. And this is simply not true. There are ongoing efforts for repatriation, research. There are ongoing efforts. Some people are paid to do this work, and some people are volunteering, voluntold by the ancestors. They are doing it for free. They are doing it for research. They are doing it because it has to be done. And so our two guests for today who are bringing this special series of Fanachu to us, Andrew Gumatauto and Samantha Barnett, are they're in Germany, and they have been working in collections in the European Union, in Germany, but also in Spain. But they're going to be highlighting collections that are in Germany. And for most people, connected to the Marianas, and for most people out here, we may not know much about this. We might wonder, how is it that there are these collections out there? And that's why this work that they are doing is so important. Because for those of us who struggle to get a ticket to go and visit our aunts and uncles in Las Vegas, for those of us who struggle just to get to the United States, imagine trying to get to Germany, see the skulls of ancestors that are there in museums. Imagine, and one of the great things that we're going to hear about today is imagine that you could make it out to Germany where you can see examples of native birds that are no longer in the Marianas, but have been preserved in museums in Germany. And so that's why this special series focusing on collections that are out there in Germany, what we can learn from them, and also how we can connect with them with the goal that eventually we are going to bring these home. And so, Sam and Andrew, si Zeus Masi Purifanatamizu, let me pass this off to you.
Half a day, Miguel. Half a day, everybody. Thank you, Jesus Maasti, for having us on the Fanachu series. And I definitely agree with everything that Miguel has said. It is very challenging to bridge these connections from home and with European institutions. And so, what Samantha and I have been doing over the course of a few years is through research, through a fellowship that Samantha has acquired, and our ongoing museum work is to um, return belonging, and that could look like several different things, and so this is the beginning of episode series where we will introduce sort of the work we've been doing and sort of the aspirations that we have um, for us and for our community back home to actually come and visit the collections here that are in Berlin. And so um, let me share screen, and we have prepared a slide presentation for you to uh, share with you what we plan. Yes. So, I've been working several years in George August University, specifically with music making across the Marianas. And perhaps, Sam, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I am currently in the Indigenous Politics program at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. But for kind of the research that that Andrew and I have been working on here in Berlin and within European collections more broadly, that was made possible in 2023. I was awarded an Alexander von Humboldt German Chancellor Fellowship, which is essentially a research fellowship where you can partner with an institution or an organization in Germany to kind of conduct a research stay. So Berlin has kind of like famously an area called Museum Island where there's tons of museums ranging from art museums, ethnological museums, and a lot of these museums have really contested histories. They hold cultural belongings, and also ancestors from countries and from islands that were formerly colonized by Germany or that continue to have some kind of colonial relationship in that sense. So, my fellowship for the course of that year from 2023 to 2024 was based in the Oceania collection within Berlin's Ethnological Museum, which is some of the work that Andrew and I will talk about today. But I think for the next slide, we're going to start with like a bit of an introduction to the museum landscape here in Berlin, and kind of how it's been for us to begin to trace some of these archival trails and piecing together where there are belongings from the Marianas and from Micronesia, kind of scattered across Berlin and scattered across these museum collections.
Yeah, so particularly on the bottom left, we have the Humboldt Forum, and inside the Humboldt Forum is the public exhibitions of Oceania, of Asia, and of Africa. And so this is basically a public exhibition of cultural belongings that were predominantly taken during the colonial era. On the top middle, we have the Museum für Naturkunde or the Berlin Natural History Museum, which was formerly during the colonial era was the Berlin Zoological Museum, which is another museum we hope to bring groups from the Marianas to. And then this is just this is one image of a traditional dress from the Mariana Islands. That's a part of the public exhibition in the Humboldt Forum. We have two other museums, the Madrid National Anthropology Museum and the museum in Paris. Maybe Samantha, how do you say this?
We always struggle with some of these museum names, but this is Quai Branly in Paris. Yeah, so Andrew and I for this past year, like as I mentioned, I was based in the Ethnological Museum, which has a really kind of expansive collection from throughout Oceania. There's a lot of belongings from Micronesia in particular, and from the Marianas as well. But something that I think really struck us as we were beginning to kind of piece together these trails is how you can really put together entire Pacific worlds and really like there are pieces of us from across the Marianas Archipelago that are assembled throughout these museums. So in the Natural History Museum, there are like the bodies of birds from Guam, which as we know, we can no longer hear their songs in our jungles. So that was really meaningful. And I think just a lot to process too, to like encounter them in these museum spaces for the first time. There's weavings from Saipan. There's like, I think, different animal and plant remains as well, from Tinian and Rhoda in the Natural History Museum. And of course, there are also a number of ancestral remains that were taken from the Marianas as well. So just thinking about across these museums, our entire archipelago is represented. I think there's even birds from Pagan in the Natural History Museum, right, Andrew? Like on one of those collection tags. Um,
Yeah, from
yeah, so
Boston,
we'll talk about
Regan.
that a bit, but just like kind of putting together all of these archival trails, and thinking about how do we go home together? How do we bring our villages closer to these spaces and to our belongings that have been kept from us for so long?
All right, next slide.
Okay, next slide. Yeah. Cool. So as I mentioned, the impetus for this research, sorry about our slide quality, was through a fellowship that I conducted at the Oceania Collection over the course of a year. And this photo here on the left, that's within the main exhibition space at the Humboldt Forum, where the Ethnological Museum is housed. So on the first day of my fellowship, it was kind of a special occasion because there was a gathering of Pacific Museum professionals who had traveled to Berlin to kind of engage with the collections in the Humboldt Forum and to discuss with the museum sort of possibilities for the restitution of their cultural belongings, and kind of how that can play out. But something that was like really striking to me, and this was like my first day working at the museum and first day of this fellowship, is as we were moving through this collection, the German curators were the ones who, of course, work at the museum and they were giving the tour. But a lot of the museum professionals from the Pacific were commenting on how there were so many errors throughout the exhibit, whether it was like objects were labeled incorrectly, things were spelled wrong, or even like in the case of some of the woven items, I think there was one piece of clothing, the way it was wrapped around like the model and how it was displayed was done incorrectly. So I think that for me, just kind of thinking about within these European centers of power and within these museums, they're presented as these really imposing spaces, and they're presented as if they're like the experts and the knowledge keepers on our histories and on our belongings. But when you bring Pacific peoples into these spaces, you realize how inaccurately we're represented and how important it is for us both to reclaim these cultural belongings for our own well-being, and to empower our own communities and kind of revitalize these lines of knowledge. But it's also important for the museum, because it's like a learning opportunity for them to realize how things are often displayed incorrectly because they don't have really firsthand experience working within the Pacific. And of course, they'll never know these belongings as well as we do in these traditions. So I think for both of us, it's really important to be able to bring Indigenous communities into these museum spaces and start to have these longer conversations about exchanging knowledge and about, of course, like addressing the injustices that have gone into creating these collections, which were oftentimes done under circumstances of colonialism or they were taken unjustly, and without the consent of like the people that they came from.
Yeah, this I really like your picture you chose, Sam. So this is the canoe exhibition hall, and so there are several canoes with sails and everything. You know, you just I don't know, put some water in, and we're sailing in that in this expansive exhibition hall with the canoe exhibition hall. There's I think it really has been for the past several years a learning process on the part of these European institutions. And so, for example, several years ago already, I think they brought out a delegation from Palau and they built a bai there. So there, if you go in there, there is a bai that was taken during the colonial era, and it was never finished because of I think World War One or World War Two, I forget which war. And but they brought the Palawan delegation to thatch the roof there, and so I think it's always a big learning process that can only be activated if we come to these places, you know. And so, case in point that I think we've been sort of talking about with other researchers who have interest in the Pacific, on another discussion, and a conference, we had the opportunity to listen to one of the authors of this book. It's called Von Kokos to Plastic. In German, it's just from coconut fronds to plastic. a sort of creative spin given this sort of cover of the ethnological muse collections. This was, I think, in the 1997s, and so we this is the only woven slipper that's in the possession of the Ethnological Museum, and so we were told that right at the get-go when we entered the storage collections, and so we were looking at it, and so we already thinking of people in mind who for whom this belonging would benefit from, and so we took HD photos and we shared it with expert akak weaver James Bamba, and say akak, right? And so akak is not cocos, it's not cocoa, it's not coconut, and so we kind of like talked about like sort of the materiality of um of the woven belongings, and he was just looking at the picture over email, and he said, this particular doga sandal is made out of poxy, and so not even akak but poxy, which is the from the pogwa tree, I believe, and so. Was there any consultation, perhaps, with the author of this book in terms of creatively crafting the sort of clever title for this book? Because it's not made out of cocos, it's not made out of coconut fronds. It's made out of it's made out of either epoxy, the one on the right, or from akka. And so this we really went at length to sort of flesh out, sort of the epistemological sort of certainties and sort of mistakes, that curators, because of their access to collections, these mistakes that they make, like, and this really goes a long way, in terms of like thinking about like our ancestors and how they went about collecting the materials in our jungles, what materials they collected, did they know what they were collecting? Did they know that, like this, we kind of, really discussed this at length, and like again, another sort of big mistake. It's very clever for trying to see the stark changes from a colonial contact to modernization, and so um, I think that this goes to show, the ongoing and the ongoing work that needs to be connected with practitioners, primarily practitioners, I would say, because even us as researchers, as primarily academics, right? I would not say that I'm a weaver. I would not say that I'm a carver. I would not say that I have a a deep knowledge of making belongings in the collection, but there are people who do, and because of the prioritization of the academy to these collections, we have to also overcome that bridge to revitalize, to bring belonging back to these belongings that should be able to access by practitioners. Yeah, okay, that's all I'll say there. Um, so a lot of our community members are interested in the collections, and through the course of our current efforts, we are locating um, these belongings to widen access for Indigenous communities throughout the archipelago. This is sort of initial conversations with James Bomba. These are sort of very interesting uh, drawings that were made from the colonial collectors. Um, and these are sort of the people that we've talked to throughout our research and work over the past several years in both Guam and the Northern Marianas. We have Auntie Frances, we have Mr. Faisal, John Tagobao at Carolinian Affairs. We have, of course, James Bomba there. Um,
Yeah, and I think oh, sorry, could you go back? Yeah, so for us, it's always been about this urgency to connect our islands with these collections. And I'll just briefly mention like part of that work, all of our research on the collection we've shared really closely through partnership with the Historic Preservation Office in the CNMI. So we were able to share that research in support of a repatriation claim for our ancestors to come back home to Saipan. And so some of that work is ongoing. But I think also I'm kind of trying to theorize some of these interactions in my dissertation. And something I've kind of been reading about is some of these differences in language, like when we use the word repatriation versus the word rematriation. So rematriation kind of emerged as this term from Indigenous feminists, speaking more broadly to what are sort of the practices of care that we can put into place when we're connecting our communities with these collections, with our ancestors and with our belongings. But I think for me, also thinking about, I guess, repatriation alternatively is more of that formal process of return, and kind of the work between governments, institutions, and the museum to kind of initiate that return. But rematriation, I think, is really about the work that happens within the communities. And rematriation is also about responsibility and kind of like what does that incite in us as people who have work to be able to have access to these collections? Like, what responsibilities do we have to bring the rest of our community closer to caring for these collections? And I think there's also sort of, in terms of thinking about that as a responsibility and an obligation that we have. But I think rematriation also really activates like these politics of care to begin thinking about the way that we go home is like bigger than just this formal repatriation. It also involves bringing in our elders. It involves bringing in youth, cultural practitioners, but kind of activating from different islands and different communities and thinking about how we can begin to sort of work to reclaim these collections. And while we're doing that, continuing to grow together towards kind of this like larger project of healing and reclamation. So that's, I think, some of the work that we want to kind of begin to engage with in this episode series as well. And we'll talk more in a few slides about some of our efforts to kind of bring groups from the Marianas closer to these collections.
Um, so we, through the course of, Samantha's dissertation, our work to bring communities over to Berlin, and my work in musicology, we uncover a lot of the histories that, that are not, I guess, uh, readily known. And so, like, for example, during the German colonial era, Saipan was a place of exile for other Pacific communities who resisted the German administration. For example, the Samoan chiefs that were exiled to Saipan because they wanted to reinstate their traditional system of government. And part of what I research is how, for example, the exiled Samoan chiefs interacted with other communities in the Marianas at that time. And so, going back to the previous slide, with my conversation with Melvin Faisal, there are still chants that are being sung and practiced that were created during this time, particularly with this chief and his interactions with the Refaluash or Carolinian chiefs at that time, um, that was part of my research, and they made a chant of how, because there were sort of interactions with Carolinian chiefs and the Samoan chief, the Carolinian chief was sent all the way up to Alamagan, and so this was something I witnessed at believe it or not, the Pacific mini games, and so. Um, Uncovering these stories and how they still are being practiced or are they still being told may not be readily like knowable on the surface, but like you can see and learn a lot about the archipelago in different ways. Um, and so Going back to our educational episode series, we are looking to bring out CNMI cultural icons such as Auntie Frances Sablan to Berlin to meet with Inetnon GefPå'go, which is doing a their own Europe tour in southern France and Belgium. And so we really want to make an intergenerational Mariana space to go and visit these collections um, in order to uh, discuss possibilities to um, revitalize ways of belonging for especially um, young youth from Guam who perhaps may not have seen a native bird in natural habitat. Of course, we are experiencing the most accelerated form of militarization throughout our archipelago. And because of that, the Northern Marianas is really a stronghold for native avifauna. Gagakarisu, um, the totot, these were once heard in our environments. And so that intergenerational discussion, some of the practices such as the stock melody of Kantan Chamarita, these are sort of the traces that still uphold the status of birds and other non-human entities that are fighting for their lives in our environment. And so we want to create this sort of musical performative space within museums, which is slowly and slowly becoming a mainstay, I think, in part of a museum protocol, especially with collections from colonial contexts. And so yes, we really need your support for those viewers out there who are listening to our discussion. Um, we hope to support Auntie Frances and then give Pago in ways that help their travel, in ways that help their accommodation, their basic food needs, and to really focus on the liberatory work that we hope to facilitate within these museums. And so we will be rolling out a GoFundMe campaign that will bolster our ongoing efforts to make this, I hope, one of not the last, but certainly a significant presence from the Marianas in Berlin. Um, Yeah, so please keep an eye out. But what are they going to do? Where are they going specifically? What's going to happen? And so let's I prepared a sort of preview of what Sam and I intend to facilitate here in Berlin. And so there are four locations. The first location in this slide is the museum complex in Dahlem. And so this is where all the non-European belongings that are not on display in the palace that we saw, the Humboldt Forum, this is the storage facility. And so you can see there's a wooden machete sheath from Alamagen. And so um, I had the pleasure of going to Alamagen once, and so it really puts things into perspective. If you if you go to a place, even as an indigenous person, like even when you go to Saipan, let's be real, it's really expensive to travel across the Marianas, and for you to see a belonging from your home island, from your home archipelago, from centuries ago, and to interact with it, it's a very visceral, it's a very emotional experience, I would say. And to know that I've, I've spent some time with the mayor of Alamog, with the mayor of the Northern Islands. I know a couple of people who've resided there. This puts there's a whole body perspective into how we interact with museums, as opposed to those who perhaps may have never gone to the islands from where these belongings are from. And so this sort of space that we hope to facilitate inside the um, this facility, we hope to have, I think we have enough lab coats and gloves and masks, we have to, follow protocol, but we also can comment on it, see what can improve upon, the curators are also eager to learn about the belongings as well, um, especially from we were from Micronesia, from the region of Micronesia, and so oftentimes we have more often other places from Polynesia that have the opportunity to go and engage in museums in this way. So this is what we intend to do in that way. So this is the storage facility in Dalam. And what's on display is in the Humboldt Forum. And so that's a whole nother expansive exhibition, the Oceania exhibition. And so there's a good Micronesia section. And so this is the Sinahis that were taken by Georg Fritz that were on display um, in the Humboldt Forum. So this is the second location. Okay, and the third location is also in the Humboldt Forum, and it's called the Berlin Phonogram Archive. And so, um, at the turn of the 20th century, there was this new technology called the phonogram. And so, German colonial administrators um, either did it by their military branch or with specific expeditions, such as the Hamburg-Zuzi expedition, and they did wax cylinder recordings in the islands. And so um, I have some colleagues who do specific research with the wax cylinders, um, and they have recordings that they've studied regarding Micronesia, regarding Pohnpei, for example. And so I hope to take the group to the phonogram archive to sort of listen to how these recordings sound, the context in which they were taken, the places and voices that are connected to these wax cylinders recordings. Um, and in addition to that, the loss of the colonies as a result of World War One were curtailed by the publications of Micronesians. The famous German South Seas expedition of Micronesia were published in the 1920s and 30s, but has specifically excluded the Marianas because Chamorro culture was perceived as too acculturated by Spanish influence. So already at the outset of sort of these technological milestones, there were racialized undertones with the way in which collectors go about collecting, untouched cultures of the Pacific because there were going to be imminently going out of existence. And so this is sort of some of the things that I research, just because perhaps the Marianas wasn't recorded by wax cylinders doesn't mean that um, you know there's their their culture was impure or they're inauthentic or but sort of teasing out, sort of the ideologies and sort of the, even the eugenics undertones of how music and sound was analyzed as sort of this really complicated and problematic branch of medical science. And so these were sort of these scientific endeavors that were going on at the time. And what does the Marianas role within that? Where was it positioned, and how do we navigate that? Okay, so that is, I think, three, and then I think Sam can talk about the last location.
Yeah, so the last location would be the Museum for Natural History. Andrea and I are currently guest researchers within the Center for Humanities of Nature. So that is kind of a department within the Natural History Museum, and kind of here you can see there are birds from throughout the Marianas as well. And could you go to the next slide, actually? I want to talk a bit about the archive part. Okay, actually, maybe skip to the one after this, and we'll go back to this after. Yeah, so I wanted to kind of talk about some of the archival work that Andrew and I have started to do at the Natural History Museum. So you can see here, these are some of the kind of the correspondence between the museum and various collectors in regards to the bird collection that's at this museum. And there are a few other like animal skulls and specimens. But this, I think, like for us, the first challenge that we face with accessing the archive is, of course, like it's written in German. The second is that it's written in this like script of the time. So it's also, I think, another level that it's hard even for like German language speakers to be able to like move through these documents. But we were lucky to be able to work with someone at the museum who kind of specializes in being able to understand the script and like the language of the era. So she kind of went through us and sifted through all of these folders that have various correspondence between collectors who were like going out to our islands, right? And like taking, basically killing birds and other animals that they would then send back to the museum. And oftentimes they would kind of haggle over like the price, over like how these kind of encounters were carried out. And all of this is still within the museum's archives. So we were kind of trying to like go through all of this correspondence, and be able to like identify the like number that's associated with the collector and with the birds or the animals in the collection. So we can kind of trace that archival trail, which will sort of help to establish how these things ended up in this museum and also where they're held in the museum. Because I think for a museum like the Natural History Collection, like they have such a vast collection and also like a tumultuous history of things moving around, of like, of course, like the two world wars affected their collections. Um, so it's hard for them also to like track down where things are located within the museum because of course like these the collections that we're talking about are not on display. They're just like within the museum storage rooms. So we have come across there's supposed to be like hundreds of butterflies that are here too. So we're that's like something that was really interesting to us that we're still trying to find, but we haven't yet located them. And like the museum also isn't sure where they are. So I think this is kind of one of the things that like it will take a lot of time for us to be able to work through the archive and begin to kind of trace where things are. But I think this could be a really like promising collaboration between like the museum and potentially like various ecologists and scientists who are doing work in the Marianas to begin to kind of reconstruct what our environments looked like over time. Of course, we're addressing like a lot of habitat loss as Andrew mentioned, due to militarization and climate change. So we think like the work in this collection could also hold a lot of potential for our people and for some of the research that's being done. But if you go back to the slide right before this.
Can I just add something?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been quite it's quite an experience, like interacting. You really have to partner, and you have to partner with of course, like a German language speaking, but also, like those who can read handschrift or even Fraktur. It's the sort of the ink typewritten style of the time. And you have one layer which is the colonial interaction, right? Back in the indigenous communities. But then you have this whole other world of this economy of the museum, writing to museum curators, writing to how are you going to sell it? Are you going to give it as a gift, or where are they traveling? It's a and then you also have to you kind of get a sense of the kind of government at the time. This was this is like an empire in like the formal sense of the word. It was there was a German emperor. So this is Das Deutsche Reich. So it's and then you have all these other intricacies, like in terms of how different political entities in Europe were sort of existing at the time. And so this idea of gift giving, this idea of sending it to different curators of like exchanges is something that we still need to brush up on. And so this was interesting to to sort of interact with this collector world as well. But yeah, let's go back to the other slide. We're at the other slide, and this is at the Staatsbibliothek. And so um, there are two main um, libraries of that's SPK is the Prussian Cultural Heritage Foundation, and so this is from this Prussia dynasty that still has descendants to today that are fighting for their own collections, and so like this is like some of the halls that you walk through, and um, this is one of the books that we found of the brittle-eyed Tinian monarch. Oh no, this is from Guahan, but I think
Yeah,
they're
it's like
related.
one.
Um, and so, but for example, we found this with in connection to Kosrae and connected to Luzon, and so oftentimes the way we understand sort of the spatial makeup of of our islands today was so totally something different back then. Like a lot of the the maps were sort of formulated, in terms of how they owned owned, right? How they administered the island. So we're like it's always when we go to the museum, it's always like Marianan, Palau, Carolinian. We're always together. We're like we're kind of grouped together and like we're in this um subjugation together, so to speak. The way they sort of were writing about us in sort of the South Seas. But yeah, Sam, do you want to say something?
Yeah, so this was the one with the Guam bird. This was like in the rare book collection room at the state library. So we were able to kind of go through like a lot of the time these collectors would keep like travel logs or like travel diaries where yeah, they would like sketch the birds that they were observing and collecting and writing about like the travels. And so of course this is all like through like a colonial lens. And like a lot of the text we kind of have to like navigate through. But I think they do also they have the potential to kind of provide us with insight to in terms of like locating where things are in the museum if we can match them up with like the collector name. So like across the various sites, right, there's like the research that we do with the archive that's held at the museum, and then there's also some of the research that we try and do like within the state library, and then it's just a matter of like kind of piecing together matching the collector and the collector accounts with what's in the museum and figuring out like where things were taken from, when they were taken, and kind of like the path that they took to like become a part of the museum's collection and to be in the museum's possession. But yeah, I think that's all of the slides that we had prepared for today.
Oh, no, Sidus Masi for sharing, for sharing all of this. This is I think for so many people when they visit museums, they think of kind of whatever they see in the exhibits, whatever they see on the walls, and then they forget that of course there's collections, there's people who manage those collections. And then a lot of times the people who manage those collections don't even know the extent of what they have back there. And so there may be things in collections, you know, around the world that have, as you've shared here, things that we thought were lost, that we may be able to gain understanding from the past, connections here, and then also just even the little intricacies of how things were obtained too. gives you a little insight into what life might have been like in the Marianas 100 years ago, 100 plus years ago, excuse me, with those little notes on them. And then, of course, I definitely love this page right here with the Nosa right there. That's because that's my youngest boy. That's my nickname for him, Nosa. And so definitely one of my favorite of the native birds. And oh man, this work is it's amazing. But one thing that what I really love about not just the this incredible work that you've done, but also the fact that then you are trying to, bring Senora Frances, Inetnon GefPå'go, you're trying to connect us today to this, right? Because one thing that scholars and researchers have gotten to see these things, that even people, out in Germany sometimes get to see these things, but that these collections have largely been disconnected from Chamorros, Carolinians, people in the Marianas for a very long time. And, one important part of not just, repatriation, rematriation, the idea of connecting communities to these items again is not just the idea that a government entity writes a letter requesting it back, even though that can be one of the most important formal parts of the process, but it's important that you bring the community to reattach value, to reconnect as well. And so that's why I'm glad that, you're it was good that you defined rematriation at the beginning, because a lot of times people think of just repatriation, which means, of course, the returning of items, and that can be very important. But one of the sad things, as we know, even on Guam, even as we've seen with repatriation past in the Marianas, is that then things get returned and then they go from one back room on the other side of the world to a back room in Guam or a back room in Saipan. And so, rematriation then involves a more substantive community focused project. And so that's what I love about bringing a cultural dance group out there so that living, breathing people from the Marianas Chamorros, and Francis, who has been in cultural revitalization, language revitalization, who has been in this for for decades now. I think she may hold the record for FestPac attendance in the Marianas at this point. And so she has, having them travel out to be part of the process of, to support while there may be efforts in the CNMI to formally, have this returned, we also need to make sure that the community feels connected to this, that the community, because if we want to say that these are that they're the ancestors, that the spirit, that our people are part of this, then it's not just the people of the past, it's us too today. We are connected to this. And so I wanted to hear your thoughts on that because later on we're going to hear from elders. In the second episode, we're going to hear from elders, and then we're going to hear Vince Regis as well. We're going to hear from Senor Francis next week. And so I wanted to hear about that because, you know, um, both of you know, of course, being scholars, uh, being up and coming scholars, it's always easier to just kind of publish things and not involve necessarily the community, to just kind of focus, do your dissertation, do your thesis, and not necessarily bring in the community. But then what is your thinking behind kind of bringing in the community into this? And
Yeah,
so,
I think this was a very interesting way that it came about. I mentioned earlier that Inetnon GefPå'go is doing a Europe tour, a festival in southern France and Belgium, and so Um, Part of the challenge, I think, with Pacific communities, particularly from Micronesia and from us, from the Marianas, we need to find clever ways to strategize, um, bringing belonging back with these collections. And so, a big challenge for us is um, part of the sort of academic funding landscape in Germany is that, especially dealing with museums, is that you have to partner with a institution in order to have any sort of significant funding awarded to any project. And so this is a sort of challenge that's Samantha and I have been having. And we believe that when this gathering happens, um, we would, I think we'll make it clear that we are very committed to doing a community prioritized project in ways that really connect these belongings to our community. And so that was really sort of the ethos of how this is coming about. And as a young musician, as a young singer that has gone to far-flung places like Europe, in the past, I didn't do it in a cultural way, representing my culture. I did represent in Guam, UOG, but like, it's just it has a different it just pulls at my heart differently. Like when I can when there's a possibility of making something happen. In this way, and broadening sort of the career landscape for our community is really a goal that I would really want to see come out, because oftentimes there's a lot of financial support in this part of the world, and so how do we tap into that? Considering what's happening in our current times right now. To bring it to a larger conversation, a lot of scholars are coming to this part of the world because of the academic precarity of the United States. And so, in what way
Yeah.
do we provide these opportunities to our young emerging scholars?
Yeah, and I think Andrew and I have really been trying to like access the German like funding landscape because like right in like a just world, like the museum would pay for elders from the CNMI to come out here. Like they have that obligation. They've built a collection from the Marianas. They've occupied the Marianas. Like they have a responsibility. They should recognize they have a responsibility to like pay for our people to come out here, but that's not happening. Um, and maybe it could happen in the future. But so I think in the absence of that, like we recognize we have a responsibility to try and like do a fundraising effort and to get this underway. But yeah, I think just accessing that funding network has been difficult to us for us because we're not tied to like a German institution anymore. We're not citizens here, so that's just been a whole other hopefully area that we can grow into because yeah, I think if you're hearing like you see how grand and like imposing these buildings are and how much resources like these institutions have, like it is really troubling that they're not funding these interactions that they have a responsibility to and that they should be funding.
No, yeah, thank you for bringing this up because I think it's just an important reminder of why the work that you two are doing is so important because some people may have some familiarity working with institutions in the United States, and institutions in the United States now may have come to a point where a lot of them are working with indigenous communities, and so they're focusing on ethical returns. Some of them are focusing on rematriation now. They're using sort of language, and so that's one context. as you go outside the United States, you get into other countries, you get into other continents, the landscape and it might be completely different. And we have to and we got to remember that. And so that's why the two of you being on the ground, already working with people in these institutions or getting funding to support your work, not being directed by anyone in the Marianas to do this, but just doing it on your own, to kind of it gives a head start to repatriation efforts from in the Marianas, in the CNMI. But it just shows that you have to kind of remember that every context is different. Every country might be a little bit different. And so sometimes one thing that I found just a little bit frustrating is this American-centric view. Sometimes people think that like NAGPRA is a global thing, for example, that because, and I've heard so many people in Guam and the CNMI, Chamorros feeling like that is going to apply. That's the way it is. And it's like, no, not necessarily. And you have to be careful how you use that because what if you're dealing with an institution which finds it offensive that you are trying to put American rules on them? That you like that it's that you're, and that so this is why the context is important. Having people that are on the ground that are doing that work it's so important. And so um, I do want to give the two of you just a chance to share any, we're just about out of time, for this episode, and I want to give the two of you any yeah, just a chance to share any final thoughts that you might have about this, this work. It's the just the small amount of stuff that you teased in this that you shared is pretty exciting stuff. And so, feel free to share, how this work has inspired you, stuff that you're looking forward to, stuff that people can look forward to in the episodes in the future, and anything that you want. And so, whoever wants to go first, put favor.
Yeah, I guess I could just say really quickly because I know like the Hornbostel repatriation conversation is ongoing at the Bishop Museum in Hawaii, and like Hornbostel was also someone who was taking things from across the Marianas. But I've been working on kind of writing about that in my dissertation, and I came across like an archive or like a series of op-eds that were written in 2000 when the ancestral remains came home from Bishop. And I didn't realize there was such a heated debate over if they should be reburied or if these ancestors should be open for like more archaeologists and like people from the university to study them. So I found like pages and pages of like people writing into the newspaper, their public hearings, and it's just really interesting how like when we are in proximity to our ancestors and to these conversations, like something I think is like activated within a lot of people, even if they're maybe not necessarily like they won't say like I'm an activist or like I'm supporting XYZ things, but like if it's about our ancestors or if it's about our belongings, like I think people have a really visceral reaction. And that's why I think I'm just really excited for our communities and our elders from the Marianas to hopefully come to these collections because I think it stirs something in us to be able to reclaim these things. And I think it activates like, and even like Andrew was saying, like for these youth to come out here and witness this and be able to be in these spaces, like I think it really does change you, like on a deeper level, when we're really brought face to face to reckon with like the violence of colonialism and what's been done to our people, but also of like the beauty of like so many of us carry this really deep love for our archipelago, for our ancestors, for all of our cultural belonging, and it's coming from that place of love and place of responsibility. And I think that's something that like for all of us as Chamorros, like we feel that really deeply when we're in these spaces with our ancestors or when we're in these conversations about rematriation and these kinds of reclamation. So yeah, that was just really cool for me to find like that there was so much heated debate like 25 years ago about these ancestors coming home, and this is still something that we're engaged in and something that we're working with. And I think it's a really deep responsibility that all of us as Chamorro people have.
Oh, si Diyos Masi, no, and with the Naftan y Mañanata being funded, and then the museum currently having the hornbostel remains and thousands of others. Sort of there will be another conversation about, should they be buried or should they be, now that DNA testing is huge and, you know, everyone wants to know, you know, where do tomorrows come from? Where can you trace your ancestor back to somebody in Mongolia or somebody in Indonesia or somebody, here, there will be another debate. But thank you for bringing up that point though and reminding us about, yeah, that power that when that power that your ancestral remains, your artifacts that it can have. That's such a good point. Andrew, Hogopolgo, final thoughts?
Yeah, just jumping on that too, I think it was in Underwood's Guau Tao Tao Tano article, like in terms of talking and writing about our past. I don't know what's the exact wording, but it's something along the lines. It's our past. Let us write about it for once. Let us talk about it for once. No, this is our this is our problem. Let us talk about our problem. So this is you know um this is a step towards bringing belonging closer. And so the debates that we're talking about is our debates to be have, not their debates to be have. And so like this is part of bringing that closer, I think. And another thing, I just like I want, like younger people to know that you can enter these spaces, you can break these ceilings, enter these spaces, and you can navigate it. And so this is sort of like the goals that we want to have with this initiative. Yeah.
Si Diyos masinuham sunodos, and si Diyos masinuham sutodos. Put in eegad zan in eekungok. Remember, this is episode one. There's going to be two more episodes in this series. Tune in next week for a Finut Samoru episode featuring a panel of Chamorro speakers talking about all sorts of fun stuff regarding the collections that are out there and weaving ancestors, all sorts of stuff like that. And then after that, Vince Regis will be joining later on this month talking about Inetnon GefPå'go. It's an exciting June. It's an exciting June on Fanachu. Si Diyos masitatlo, adios. Este aquí.